Well, Westminster Abbey really hasn't changed much since Queen Elizabeth was crowned here, but she has changed, and so has the monarchy.
In the hushed grandeur of royal tradition, silence often reigns supreme. But on that fateful day, surrounded by pageantry, pressed uniforms, and centuries of whispered protocol, Queen Elizabeth II muttered a phrase so subtle, so fleeting, that most never caught it. Yet one expert did. A lip reader, trained not just in movement of mouths, but in decoding guarded secrets, studied the footage obsessively, frame by frame, gesture by gesture, until the truth quietly unraveled. What Her Majesty said that day didn't just rattle royal watchers, it rewrote what many thought they knew about her final chapter. It wasn't just a comment, it was a window into a mind burdened by legacy, family betrayal, and unspoken truths that had simmered behind palace walls for decades. It all began with a single broadcast, a solemn moment during a nationally televised ceremony, with the Queen seated still, dignified, and poised. Cameras rolled, eyes watched, and millions mourned, unaware that within this moment lay a mystery yet to be cracked. The footage passed, across airwaves without much notice. But something felt off. Not the Queen's expression. It was her lips. Barely moving, but undeniably in motion. A mutter? A message? Or simply nothing at all? Enter Jessica Reese, a forensic lip reader who had worked with law enforcement, deciphered courtroom evidence, and helped unravel high-stakes investigations. She wasn't just an interpreter, she was a human decoder. And when she examined the Queen's final public appearance, what she uncovered sent shockwaves across Britain. Reese, known for her precision and uncanny ability to translate even the faintest flicker of lip movement, spent over a month analyzing the footage in silence. Her revelation wasn't wild speculation, it was backed by decades of work, frame-by-frame analysis, and confirmed by silent motion professionals. And the Queen's words? They weren't casual or ceremonial. They were loaded, intentional. A cryptic acknowledgement of regret, of foresight, perhaps even of betrayal. Duty is heavy. The crown, heavier still. Reese claimed the Queen had whispered. Just 7 words, but they spoke volumes. The media exploded. Royal commentators scrambled for context. Was it a reference to Prince Harry and Meghan's departure? A nod to the growing strain within the family? Or something else, something more historical and more heartbreaking? Social media erupted with theories. Royal biographers were summoned for comment. The palace? Silent, as always. But insiders, former staffers, and those closest to the Queen began leaking small confirmations. Yes, she had spoken quietly that day. Yes, her mood had been particularly solemn. And yes, it was entirely in character for Elizabeth to use few words to say everything. But this was not the first time the Queen's private thoughts had slipped past the iron gates of Buckingham Palace. The power of silence had always been her strength, but sometimes silence cracks. And when it does, it reveals far more than speeches ever could. To truly understand the weight of these whispered words, we must journey back through her life, where silent expressions often spoke louder than any royal decree, and moments of human vulnerability defined the monarch beneath the crown. Every queen has a public face, composed, regal, and immovable in the face of global attention. But behind Queen Elizabeth's legendary calm was a woman who, on rare occasions, let the mask slip. These fleeting glimpses weren't planned. They came unannounced, sharp, unscripted, and human. In a world built on royal restraint, these moments cut through centuries of silence, and those who saw them firsthand never forgot them. It was 2007 when one such moment broke through the palace's practiced perfection. A photo shoot with acclaimed photographer Annie Leibovitz turned tense when Leibovitz, aiming for a more relaxed portrait, suggested the Queen remove her ceremonial crown. The room froze. Time slowed. The Queen didn't respond with humor or confusion. Her reply, sharp and precise, cut through the air. "What do you think this is?" It was the kind of moment that revealed more than any interview ever could. She wasn't just defending tradition. She was asserting her role, her presence, her command. And yet, when media outlets later released a preview of the footage edited out of order, it falsely portrayed her as storming out. The truth? She had stayed. She had completed the shoot. But the world, eager for cracks in her composure, took the bait. The broadcaster later issued an apology, but the damage was done. That day, a whisper of frustration had pierced the myth of perfect monarchy. But this wasn't the only time she had spoken her truth, however quietly. In 2002, during a public event involving Prince Philip's participation in a horse-driving competition, photographers swarmed too close to the Queen. She sat composed at first, but her irritation steadily grew. Finally, she turned to them, not with rage, but with unmistakable firmness, and demanded they give her space. It was simple, direct, and so completely out of the ordinary that it stunned those present. The message was clear. Even a queen has boundaries. Then came 1954, an incident, so charged it was kept from public view for decades. While on a royal tour of Australia, the Queen and Prince Philip engaged in a heated argument inside a cottage. A nearby film crew watched in stunned silence as Philip stormed out, only to be summoned back by Elizabeth moments later. The footage was never aired, but years later, biographies confirmed the story. It shattered the illusion that royal marriages are immune to turmoil. They were partners in duty, yes, but also two individuals grappling with love, pressure, and exhaustion under the harshest spotlight on Earth. In 2016, during her 90th birthday celebrations, the Queen offered yet another glimpse into her private self. As she stood on the palace balcony with her family, Prince William crouched to speak with young Prince George. The Queen, still sharply aware of ceremonial formality, leaned in and gently told William to stand up. It was maternal, yes, but also a quiet assertion that tradition must still be honored, even in joyful moments. This wasn't criticism, it was guidance. The kind passed silently from one generation to the next. These moments didn't just reveal emotion. They hinted at something deeper, a woman balancing two lives, one of visible monarchy and one of private humanity. But no single portrayal would test this balance more, or shake the palace's silence louder, than the version millions would soon stream into their living rooms. A fictionalized drama that claimed to show the real Queen, but may have cut deeper than anyone expected. What began as entertainment, lavish, addictive, and masterfully performed, slowly unraveled into a quiet, royal nightmare. The Crown, Netflix's crown jewel of prestige drama, was never meant to be a source of scandal. But for Queen Elizabeth II, it became something far more personal, far more painful. At first, it was harmless curiosity, a television show inspired by real events dressed in glamour, scripted with care. Prince Edward and his wife Sophie, perhaps seeking to bridge generational distance, brought DVDs of the first season to Windsor. During quiet evenings, the family reportedly watched together. The Queen, ever polite and disciplined, was said to have found it entertaining, even charming. But that sentiment would not last. The early episodes painted a picture of her, younger self, duty-bound, intelligent, hesitant, but growing into her role. It was familiar enough to spark nostalgia, dramatized enough to seem distant. But as the seasons advanced, the tone shifted, and so did the Queen's feelings. By the second season, amusement gave way to discomfort. One particular episode left, a mark that would never fade. It told the story of young Prince Charles's harrowing time at Gordonstoun School, a rugged institution chosen by Prince Philip in the belief that hardship built character. The episode depicted Charles as isolated, bullied, and emotionally shattered, writing miserable letters to his parents. It wasn't just dramatic, it was devastating. But it was the portrayal of Prince Philip that pierced the Queen's composure. Matt Smith, who played the Duke of Edinburgh, embodied a version of Philip that struck a nerve. Cold, harsh, emotionally unavailable. In one scene, he scoffed at his son, calling him weak. That scene, fictional though it may have been, hit the Queen hardest. To the millions watching, it seemed plausible, believable. But to the Queen, it was deeply unjust. Because behind closed doors, Prince Philip had been more than just a partner. He was a fiercely engaged father. And while his methods may have been strict, his love was never in question. The Queen had seen him sit with Charles for hours, heard the private words of encouragement, felt the weight of his sleepless nights worrying over his children, and now the world believed he was a villain. That shift, when a dramatized script begins to overwrite real memory, became the Queen's deepest fear. In a world where headlines are shaped by fiction and reputations destroyed by scripts, the Crown had crossed a line it no longer entertained. It redefined her family's truth. Viewers didn't just enjoy it, they believed it. Younger generations, with no memory of the real events, absorbed the show as gospel. The Queen watched as the past was reshaped by a screenwriter's pen, not history's hand. And with every new season, new wounds were opened, not just for her, but for everyone the story touched. Yet, as always, she remained silent. No statements, no interviews, just a calm face and a quiet presence. But within palace walls, the pain was unmistakable. This wasn't the kind of publicity the monarchy could ignore, because while television scripts dramatized palace life, real royal weddings brought far heavier emotional truths to the Queen's doorstep, and no camera could rewrite those. Beneath the diamonds and tiaras, beneath the televised perfection and choreographed waves, lived stories the world was never meant to hear. Royal weddings dazzled millions, but behind the veil of silk and spectacle were fractures, quiet heartbreaks that no cathedral bells could drown. And at the center of it all stood Queen Elizabeth II, a monarch watching love and duty collide again and again, sometimes in silence, sometimes with sorrow. When Charles married Diana in 1981, it was a global fairy tale. A 20-year-old bride stepped into the spotlight, her gown trailing behind her like a storybook dream. The world cheered, the monarchy sparkled, and yet, behind the stained glass windows of St. Paul's Cathedral, unease was already taking root. Those close to the palace knew something wasn't right. Diana's nerves were real. Her fears whispered only to those she trusted. And Charles? His heart, still tangled in a love that couldn't be named, was miles away. Even the Queen, stoic as ever, sensed the cracks. On the balcony of Buckingham Palace, as Diana stood next to her new husband, the Queen is said to have leaned in and offered soft, almost motherly words. A quiet reminder that wearing a crown figuratively, or literally, was never light. That kindness, patience, and strength would be her only lifelines in the storms ahead. But no gentle words could mend what had already begun to break. Years later, when Charles and Camilla finally wed, the memory of Diana still loomed over every detail. It was not the grand public wedding expected of a future king. Instead, it was quiet. A civil ceremony, deliberately understated. When Queen Elizabeth chose not to attend the actual ceremony, speculation erupted. Rumors of disapproval filled tabloid pages. But the truth, as always, was more complex. As the head of the Church of England, she was bound by ancient traditions. A civil wedding for two divorced individuals, one of whom had been at the heart of the monarchy's most painful scandal, was something she simply couldn't publicly endorse. But absence did not mean rejection. She attended the blessing. She hosted the reception. And during that gathering, surrounded by awkward smiles and cautious congratulations, she broke through the tension with a rare joke. With classic dry wit, she likened their long, winding relationship to a steeplechase, a challenging course with many obstacles. Laughter followed. Tension lifted. For just a moment, the monarch became a grandmother, a mother-in-law, a woman watching two people finally find their place beside each other. Through each wedding, the Queen bore the weight of contradiction. Her duty demanded composure, but her heart couldn't ignore the pain she saw in those she loved. She upheld traditions even as they tore through the lives of her children. And she protected the crown, knowing full well it had cost her family dearly. These ceremonies weren't just celebrations, they were battlegrounds of expectation and emotion. Public displays of unity, masking private dissonance. But in 2011, the monarchy would see something it hadn't in decades: genuine hope. A wedding that didn't just promise unity for the cameras, but whispered of something real behind palace walls. And with that promise came a choice of carriage, one that awakened memories the Queen had long buried. As tradition met modern love, one subtle detail stirred the Queen's heart so quietly, in fact, that only those watching with trained eyes and decades of memory would even notice. Prince William's wedding to Kate Middleton wasn't just another royal spectacle, it was a moment of transition. A monarch nearing the twilight of her reign, and a new generation stepping into the light. But amidst the music, the vows, and the sweeping view of Westminster Abbey, there was a decision that touched Queen Elizabeth more deeply than anyone could have guessed. A carriage. Not just any carriage, the 1902 state landau, elegant and stately, but not the one she had once imagined for this day. Because to her, nothing echoed royal tradition like the glass coach. It had carried her on her own wedding day in 1947, glowing with post-war hope. It had carried her daughter, Princess Anne. It had carried Diana. The choice of a different vehicle was not a slight, nor a scandal. It was simply a reflection of new times. But, for the Queen, it was a soft reminder that the world was changing, fast, and that even the most cherished symbols could quietly fade into memory. During the ceremony, lip readers captured a hushed exchange between Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. It wasn't official, it wasn't broadcast, but it said enough. She remarked ever so softly that she would have preferred the glass coach. Not with anger, not with disappointment, but with the gentle wistfulness of someone watching her legacy take a new form. For a woman who built her reign on consistency and symbolism, this small deviation was not insignificant. It was personal. Yet, despite that tiny pang, the Queen made no sign of disapproval. In fact, she admired Kate deeply. The future Duchess of Cambridge displayed the rare combination of grace, resilience, and warmth that reminded Elizabeth of her own early days. Poised, respectful, and never seeking the spotlight for its own sake, Kate represented something rare. In the world of royalty, a grounded soul with the strength to weather storms yet to come. And the public agreed. The nation, weary from years of scandal and friction, embraced the couple with open arms. Their love felt real. Their connection, authentic. Finally, the monarchy had a pair that felt both relatable and dignified. For Queen Elizabeth, it was more than a wedding. It was the passing of an unspoken torch. She knew what this moment meant, not just for her family, but for the very survival of the monarchy's image. The crowds roared, the cameras flashed, but in that brief glance toward the carriage and that quiet comment to her husband, she revealed something deeper, a recognition that time was moving forward, whether tradition kept pace or not. But while this union symbolized hope, clean, clear, and fresh, the very next royal wedding would be anything but. What followed was not soft transition, but sharp deviation. And for a queen who had already endured so much, it would become a source of quiet strain and emotional exhaustion she never publicly acknowledged, but certainly felt. What started with a fairy tale dress ended with a fractured dynasty. From the outside, the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle appeared to be a dream come true, an American actress stepping into royal history, rewriting the rulebook with elegance, confidence, and modern charm. But beneath the surface, tension was already threatening to shatter the carefully constructed illusion. For Queen Elizabeth, who had seen the highs and lows of royal unions across generations, this wedding wasn't just different, it was deeply unsettling. The first warning sign came in silk and symbolism. Meghan chose a pure white gown, radiant, stunning, and deliberately untraditional. In royal history, white had always stood for innocence and first marriages, especially within the church's conservative eyes. Meghan, a divorcee, had defied expectations, and though no formal objections were raised, the silence within the palace was loud. Some believed it was a bold feminist choice. Others whispered that it was a quiet challenge to centuries of royal formality. And the Queen? She said nothing publicly, but according to insiders, she was surprised. Not outraged, but subtly disappointed by what the gown represented. Not rebellion, but a disregard for the subtle codes that once defined royal grace. Then came the tiara. Meghan had her heart set on a dazzling emerald headpiece from the royal collection, but the request was denied. Angela Kelly, the Queen's trusted dresser and gatekeeper of the crown jewels, reportedly followed protocol to the letter. The rules were non-negotiable, but behind palace walls, whispers of conflict echoed louder than tradition. Rumors spread that Meghan was difficult, that Harry had angrily intervened, and that the Queen had to step in to restore order. For Elizabeth, who had spent decades mastering the art of silent diplomacy, this was exhausting. She wasn't angry at the couple. She was tired of tension, tired of friction, tired of watching another royal wedding become a battlefield instead of a blessing. And yet, amidst the mounting pressure, she granted a quiet exception, one that said more than words ever could. Harry, still emotionally raw from losing his mother, requested to wear his military uniform to the ceremony. Not unusual, but he insisted on keeping his beard. A break from long-standing dress code expectations. Technically, it wasn't allowed, but the Queen approved it. A small act of understanding from a grandmother who still remembered the boy who once walked behind Diana's coffin. She didn't fight the beard. She didn't fight the uniform. But she knew what it cost to bend traditions even for love. Then came the chaos. Days before the wedding, Meghan's father, Thomas Markle, was caught in a scandal involving staged paparazzi photos. The Queen, always composed, privately encouraged Meghan to reconcile and repair the situation, but it was too late. The damage had been done. He would not attend the wedding. Another fracture. Another storm. And through it all, the Queen stood firm, composed, but slowly unraveling inside. Not because she disapproved of Meghan, but because the weight of modern monarchy was starting to crush the fragile balance she had maintained for decades. She had hoped this wedding would mark a new era of unity. Instead, it became another chapter of tension and distraction. She didn't scold. She didn't interfere. But those closest to her could see it. The exhaustion in her eyes, the heaviness in her silence. She was already shouldering a fractured family. Now, she was watching it tear itself apart in public, piece by piece. But even after the ceremony, the real storm hadn't yet arrived. Because what came next wasn't about outfits or titles. It was about something far more personal. One name, just a single name, would ignite a firestorm inside Buckingham Palace that even the Queen couldn't ignore. They said it was in her honor, that naming their daughter, Lilibet Diana, was a tribute, a bridge back to the woman who had held the monarchy together for over 7 decades. But the Queen stayed silent, not because she was overwhelmed with emotion, and not because she was too frail to respond. She stayed silent because the gesture, however well-intended, cut deeper than anyone outside the palace walls could possibly understand. Lilibet wasn't just a name, it was sacred. A childhood nickname born from innocence, carried through her private life by her parents, her sister Margaret, and most tenderly, by Prince Philip, the man who never once called her anything else. So when Harry and Meghan made the announcement to the world, celebrating the birth of their daughter with the name Lilibet Diana, the media spun it as reconciliation, as a peace offering. But inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Conflicting reports erupted. Had the Queen been asked? Was her blessing real or simply assumed? Some royal insiders claimed the couple had informed her after the decision had already been made. Others insisted she had been caught off guard, her shock carefully masked by decades of practiced poise. But one thing was certain. There would be no official photograph. No regal portrait of the Queen holding baby Lilibet. No moment for the cameras. Just silence. A silence that spoke volumes. For Queen Elizabeth, whose life had been governed by tradition, discretion, and loyalty, the name felt like something had been taken, not gifted. Lilibet wasn't a brand. It wasn't a headline. It was a word wrapped in memory, shaped by love, and buried in the private corners of her heart. She had only ever allowed it to live in the company of those who truly knew her. And now, it was out there, global, public, rebranded. But it wasn't just about the name. The Queen still bore the invisible bruises from the Oprah interview that had aired just months earlier. Harry and Meghan's sit-down had done more than challenge protocol, it had fractured the very foundation of trust within the family. Accusations of racism, claims of emotional neglect, The monarchy, once a fortress, had been laid bare on international television. And for a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting that fortress, the betrayal wasn't just painful, it was humiliating. She had faced scandals before, survived family breakdowns and public storms, but never like this. Never from the inside, never from her own blood. Behind closed doors, senior aides whispered concerns. Would the baby's image be used in media? Deals? Was the name a heartfelt tribute or a strategic headline grab? The Queen didn't speak out. She didn't need to. Her actions were deliberate, measured. And though she continued to publicly express love for her grandson and his family, a quiet boundary had been drawn. The photograph that never came was not just a missed opportunity. It was a decision, a line. And yet, even after all this, after the pain, the silence, and the growing distance, her final words would surprise the world. Because when the time came, the Queen did what she always had. She chose grace. And in doing so, she reminded everyone of the difference between public noise and quiet power. Her reign ended with a whisper, but it echoed with meaning. After 70 years of power, poise, and unshakable presence, Queen Elizabeth II didn't leave the world with a speech or a declaration. No grand farewell, no final address. Just a quiet sentence shared not from a throne, but in the intimacy of a private moment. According to Sarah Ferguson, one of the few who remained close to her in those final days, the Queen looked at her with calm clarity and said, "Remember that yourself is good enough." 7 words. Simple, undramatic. But in those 7 words, lived the full weight of a lifetime spent carrying a crown heavier than the world will ever know. For decades, Queen Elizabeth was defined by her silence. In an age of noise, scandal, and media obsession, she remained immovable, never raising her voice, never responding in kind to the chaos around her. When critics circled, she stayed dignified. When tabloids attacked, she stood tall. When her family made choices that broke her heart, she grieved in private and held the institution together in public. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need headlines. She chose grace, not because she was weak, but because she believed in something greater than herself. In an era that prized visibility, she valued restraint. And in a time where vulnerability was often weaponized, she held on to strength like it was armor. Even during her most personal trials, Diana's death, Harry and Meghan's public separation from the family, and the Crown's fictional dramatization of her most private moments, she never lashed out. She didn't defend. She didn't explain. Because she didn't believe the Crown existed to serve personal pride. It was never about ego. It was about service. The Queen believed that legacy isn't built by fighting back. It's built by standing firm when everything around you begs you to break. That's why, when the world spiraled into division, she remained the symbol of unity. And when faith in institutions faltered, she became the last one people could still trust. Her funeral drew millions. Mourning swept across the globe, not just for a monarch, but for the end of an era. Streets overflowed with silence. Flags hung, heavy in the wind. A generation realized they had never known a world without her. And in her absence, something became clear. This wasn't just a change in leadership. This was a transformation of time itself. The transition was quiet, as she would have wanted it. But the grief was loud, because no one could quite imagine what would follow. She left behind more than a monarchy. She left behind a blueprint for strength. A reminder that real power doesn't always come with volume. Sometimes it comes in a whisper that says, hold steady, stay kind, and know your worth even if no one else sees it yet. She never needed to shout to be heard. Now that her whisper is finally decoded, what will we do with the truth? Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments section, and we will see you in the next one.